afternoon, everyone. My name is Grace Lee, and I have been a moderator here for various panels here in Texas for over 5 years, and I have covered many topics on current issues and current events and many other social issues that we're going to discuss here today. We have 3 panelists here. We have Dr. Nikki Kunkel, who is an economics professor. We have Mr. Justin Tanwi, who is a committed social activist and who's a fighter for women's rights. And finally, we have Ms. Lizette Cruz, who is a representative of sales tax commissions here in Texas. I would like to thank you, everyone, for coming to the annual city meeting here. Before we start, I would like to ask everyone to turn off their cell phones, and if you must leave, please leave quietly. Hold all questions until the end, and panels, you have about 1 to 2 minutes to answer the questions. To begin, Dr. Kunkel, do you mind explaining what this tax is about?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I am Dr. Kunkel. And what is this tax about? Well, I hope to answer my questions today in a neutral position. I hope to provide you Austinians with general knowledge so that as active members of our city, you can make educated decisions about sort of policies that you'd like to see enacted. So in short, the tax on feminine hygiene products is, for the most part, a sales tax. And as some of you might know, sales tax vary state by state. And what they tax, according to most legislation, is tangible personal property. And there are exceptions made to products that are necessities. So here we have this sort of issue of subjectivity. How do policymakers enforce these laws? What really should be considered a necessity, which arguably women need feminine hygiene products unless they just want to bleed everywhere during their period. And since it varies state by state, depending on how they read it, it's been sort of an upcoming issue. Currently, there are only 5 states, not including states that don't have sales taxes, that decided not to tax feminine hygiene products. So that's Maryland, Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, Minnesota, and New Jersey. For instance, sales taxes, their exemptions are kind of weird, like I said, subjective. California does not exempt hot prepared foods, but they will exempt cold foods as a necessity, for instance.
Okay, I would like to ask you another question. Why do you think this is such a big current issue?
What I just mentioned, that interpretation piece, there's a very subjective piece to it, and then how it's actually enforced as well. Recently, it's been picking up speed because a California assemblywoman voiced this opinion that this is regulatory discrimination. And she's introducing in California a new bill to try to remove the tax on feminine hygiene products. And the comparison that she made is that tampons for women are just about as necessary as condoms for men, which are treated differently under these tax laws. So this was all reported by the Washington Post if you want to read about what she's doing. Most sales tax laws do include toilet paper. There's about 7 states that don't. Maryland doesn't tax baby powder or baby oil. And we're in the midst of a third wave feminist movement, so people are very concerned about what is going to be considered exempt or not. In other countries, there's value-added taxes on tampons and feminine hygiene products. A sales tax is just a tax that is put on the product at the very end once it's being sold to a consumer. A value-added tax is put on a product each step of the way that it's being manufactured, so that comes out much more costly. So on the other side, people are arguing, well, this doesn't really make too much of a financial impact, it's just a sales tax. We don't see the huge amounts of taxation in the United States as we see in other countries. So Ireland actually doesn't tax, but Malaysia, they brought up a proposed bill, the people did, and legislation sort of laughed in the face of not taxing feminine hygiene products, so it's treated very differently.
Thank you, Dr. Kunkel. I would like to address this next question to Ms. Cruz. Now that we understand more or less what this tax is about, what is your stance on this tax?
My name is Lizette Cruz, and I am for having a tax on feminine hygiene products. Being part of the representative, being a representative for the Sales Tax Commission here in Texas, I'm looking at this from a financial standpoint, and if we were to follow suit as other states did and do away with this tax, we are looking at a higher tax rate overall. A representative for the Idaho Sales Tax Commission made a good point, saying that tampons and pads are used for feminine hygiene and not for the use of cure, diagnosis, treatment, and or prevention of feminine diseases. Texas law also states that any over-the-counter drugs that require drugs facts label is to be exempt from sales tax, and tampons and pads and other feminine hygiene products simply do not fall under that category.
Thank you, Ms. Cruz. I would like to go to Mr. Justin Tanwy and ask what your position is on.
As Ms. Lee mentioned, my name is Justin Tanwy, and again, I'm a social activist that has given numerous lectures on various issues of social inequalities for a number of years now. And as far as my stance goes on this issue, I personally believe that this tax should no longer be in place. As Dr. Kunkel briefly summarized, this entire debate sort of originates from the fact that these feminine hygiene products are by law not considered to be a necessity and therefore are being taxed, which seems and is, quite frankly, unfair to women. And as a man, I don't know how much credibility I exactly have in saying this, but I think most women, if not all women, would agree that tampons and pads are a necessity. And for there to be a law in place that says that these items aren't a necessity and to tax these items when something like, I don't know, a bag of chips is not being taxed, it makes sense as to why this is such a controversial issue. That being said, I believe this debate could go even further for two main reasons. A point that President Obama made in a recent interview of his with Time magazine is that this tax creates an issue for women when it comes to providing basic health care. I mean, if this tax were to affect a woman's ability to buy these products, they would be deprived of having decent preventive health care methods, which creates a whole other issue on its own. Secondly, according to Washington Post, women have to pay on average about $7 a month, which is roughly $80 to $90 per year, which may not seem like a lot, but in the end it really all adds up. And for now, those are the main reasons why I'm against the tax on feminine hygiene products.
Thank you. I would like to ask you again, do you think this tax should be eliminated and why?
Yeah, if anything, I think the best way of solving this issue is to stop taxing feminine products altogether. Again, if I could just elaborate a bit more on my last point, I believe the best way of looking at this issue is to, if you were to talk about the main reason of implementing a sales tax, it would be to redistribute wealth from the rich to the poor. So essentially, necessities would not be taxed, and items that aren't necessities, luxuries, typically bought by those who are rich would be taxed, and then you therefore have a redistribution of wealth. Now keep that in mind. And now in contrast, consider the current inequality between the income of men compared to the income of women. And whether you think this income gap has something to do with the way companies happen to run their business, or if you happen to think it's a social construct of imposing genders, or regardless of whatever you think, there is an income gap, and it's clearly evident. And women are unfortunately making substantially less than men. So now that being said, if you were to combine those two thoughts, when you combine the fact that women make less than men, and you have a tax on a product specifically tailored to women, whom all of which consider that product to be a necessity, you've pretty much exploited the basic use of a sales tax by taxing a necessity that lower income individuals need. And on top of that, you've narrowed it down to exploiting a specific gender. So yes, I believe that feminine hygiene products should not be taxed, because you can't get away from the fact that this is a regulatory discrimination against women, and it is an unjust use of our sales taxes.
Thank you, Mr. Stanley. And I would like to address this last question to Ms. Cruz. How do you feel about this? What would happen to the economy if elimination were to take place?
Well, I couldn't speak for the economy as a whole, given that the tax varies per state. But as far as the state of Texas, if we were to eliminate this tax on feminine hygiene products, residents would save at least $30 per year. But as I stated before, the overall tax rate would go up, reducing the revenue in the general fund by over $1 million in the next year. Just earlier this year, France rejected the idea of taking away the tax, given that it would reduce their tax receipts by $63 million in 2016. Also, Australia did not have a tax on their feminine hygiene products, but recently retracted from that, given that it left an estimated tax shortfall of at least $30 million annually, according to BBC. So let's say that we do take away the sales tax. This would result with us relying heavily on the taxes on restaurant food, which I know we all like to indulge in every once in a while, but also the already very expensive electronics and furniture, which people tend to cut back on if the economy weakens. Going through with this would just make the sales tax receipts more volatile and worsening the budget crisis that arise in recessions. So once again, my name is Lizette Cruz, and I am for having a tax on tampons, given that it would financially benefit everyone.
Thank you, Ms. Cruz. And Dr. Kunkel, do you actually see this elimination being harmful to the economy according to maybe data from other world economies?
Well, Lizette brought up some very good points about Australia having to pull back, for instance, with having to deal with sort of deficits. Euronews has reported that the UK, due to deficits, had to increase their value-added tax from 17.5% to 20%. So their sales tax has increased dramatically. And yes, if we were, in simple terms, to remove a sales tax on a certain product, then the state would rely on getting that revenue elsewhere. According to CBS, there's an estimated $20 million collected annually by California just on feminine hygiene products. But if you compare that to the billions of dollars collected in total in sales taxes, that's actually over $100 billion throughout the state annually, it doesn't seem like too much of a dent. For instance, California, how states handle that is really difficult though, because it really depends on the economy of that particular place and what they're going through. So the UK has a deficit. California didn't allow diapers to be exempt because they felt like it was too much of a dent. They're facing drought right now. It's very hard to say from the data. It depends on so many other factors besides just feminine hygiene products. And to say that just one product in particular can throw off an entire economy, I believe is somewhat of a stretch, but what feminine hygiene products provide is a sort of steady revenue for states and governments. So that's why they're of interest to be taxed like diapers are. I hope I've been able to provide a sort of neutral knowledge base for you all today. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kunkel. Last question for Mr. Tanwi. So what do you think would be the next step for those who are against the tax?
Well, there's still a lot to be done. 40 states are still imposing a sales tax on feminine hygiene products, and Texas still being one of them. As far as what you can do as an individual is to join, if you haven't already, the Stop Taxing Periods campaign, and go ahead and sign their petition. And you might not think this, but it really is as easy as signing a petition. For instance, in those 5 states, I believe it was Massachusetts, New Jersey, Maryland, Pennsylvania, and Minnesota, they all went through that similar plan of action and have lifted the tax on feminine hygiene products. So yeah, be sure to spread the word and to explain to those who don't know what exactly is going on that this is an issue of regulatory discrimination, that it is an exploitation of the sales tax, and it's not something we should stand for, especially when we as citizens can do something about it. Again, my name is Justin Tanwi, and I'm against the the taxing of feminine hygiene products, for the reasons being that it unjustly disadvantages women both from a health standpoint and even more so economically, and I hope I've given you enough reason to make a change.
Thank you, Mr. Tanwi. So that is all the questions I have for the panelists. Just to recap, Dr. Kunkel provided a neutral stance on this current issue. She provided us the basic knowledge of legislation in place and how it is handled abroad. Ms. Lizette Cruz is for the tax on feminine products. She believes that it is more financially beneficial for the state. And Mr. Justin Tanwi voiced reasons on why we should consider removing the tax and how we should move forward in doing so. Thank you everyone for coming today, and thank you panelists for taking the time to inform the general public on this current issue. And before we all leave, I would like to open the floor for any questions, about 2 to 3 minutes. Yes?
I have a question for Ms. Cruz. Seeing that you are for the tax, do you see any alternatives besides elimination?
Ms. Cruz, I think this question was addressed to you. Do you see any alternatives in the elimination?
Financially and realistically, I do not see an alternative to this. I think leaving the tax on the feminine hygiene products is fine. I don't think the difference between taking the tax off of the feminine hygiene products I don't think it'll make much of a difference. If you're not spending it on those products, you're going to be spending it on something else. So I don't really see much of a difference.
Thank you.
Yes.
So my question was, what are your thoughts on a similar issue of gender pricing and pink tax?
I believe this question is addressed towards Mr. Tanwi. The question was, what are your thoughts on similar issues of gender pricing and the pink tax?
Okay, so for those of you who don't know exactly what the pink tax is, it's a term used to refer to the issue